My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, the thing is, I want to learn. And as it turns out, I work with people who know a lot about classical music. Every week on this show, one of my coworkers will give me a homework assignment, a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. Hi, and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I'm Dacia Clay, and today my instructor will be our benevolent overlord, program director, St.John Flynn.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to class.
It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So what will you be teaching me about today, St.John?
Well, I thought that today we'd have you listen to Richard Strauss's 4 last songs.
That sounds like a lovely idea. Let's hear a little bit of it as a novice. I'm not sure how familiar people are with this piece, if it's very popular or not, so let's take a listen. By the way, I love the beginning of this piece. It sounds so familiar, like I've heard it in a film score.
It has been used in film, yes. In fact, I'm not sure that it's actually this song, but one of the other, Beim Schlafen gehen, was used in the film The Hours.
Ah, okay.
Meryl Streep's character is playing that song.
Okay, yeah. I also think it's really curious that the piece is called Spring, and it starts out...
The one that we're listening to right now is Spring, right?
Yeah, and yet it starts on such a down note. It's in such a minor key.
And it's very mysterious.
Very.
And in fact, the text, the poem by Hermann Hesse, starts off, "In shadowy crypts I dreamt long of your trees and blue skies, of your fragrance and birdsong." So right at the beginning, spring we think of as this time of rebirth and blossoming, etc. And the song starts with death.
Yeah.
The crypt.
Yeah, I have it right here in my notes. Starts with death. What I immediately thought of, and maybe that's just because I'm going back to my very limited knowledge of classical music that I've learned in the classical classroom. I thought about Vivaldi's 4 Seasons. I kind of used that as a way to think of these 4 songs. It served as kind of a useful tool to think about these.
Do you mean the sense of Vivaldi sort of embodying the season in the music?
Yes,
right.
Yes, exactly. So his 4 seasons are straightforward. You listen to the music, you think of the season, there's pretty much a direct correlation.
Right.
So you start out listening to Strauss's
in the 4
Spring,
last songs, right?
And it begins with death, and you're immediately like, what is going on here?
Well, what's the significance of that?
What you're asking? What is the significance?
Right. I mean,
of that?
What does that do to this set?
It certainly sets a tone.
Precisely. It sets a tone, not only in terms of the music, but also in terms of the text as well.
Yeah.
I mean, you're starting off with death in these, what is it, the shadowy crypts. When you're talking about spring, which traditionally poetically is as we said is flowers and it's birds singing and the sun shining, And so that dissonance, if you like, between the traditional subject matter of spring and the text and the way that Strauss sets it to music, I think sets the tone for these 4 songs, which are grouped, of course, as we said, thematically.
So tell me about Strauss. When did he live?
Well, I can tell you that he died in 1949. He died in September 1949. He was born in 1864. So he bridges 19th and 20th century. I mean, he's born in 1864 and he lives almost to the middle of the 20th century. A time of huge change, obviously, in the world and in Europe. I mean, he lived through both world wars. He was German, and interestingly, his wife was a soprano.
That explains so much.
And his father was a musician, and he played horn. And Strauss always writes really well for the horn.
Yeah, I noticed a lot of French horn in this.
Of course, the French horn has that sort of burnished September feel to its sound anyway, so it fits perfectly with the theme of these songs.
Was he wealthy? Was he part of the upper class?
No, he was from a family of musicians. As I said, his father played horn. I think he was in a court orchestra. He certainly wasn't from an aristocratic background. No.
Okay. And who were his influences? Who did he really go to musically?
That's a very good question. I think Strauss comes out of that Central European tradition, particularly somebody like Wagner.
Yeah, you can hear the sort of, when I think of Wagner, the little that I know about Wagner, I think of epic, big,
Right.
And you definitely hear some of that echoed in Strauss's work.
You listen to a lot of Strauss's orchestral music, and you hear echoes of Wagner and Mahler in the sense of that there is that lushness, but there is that complexity and density. And Strauss coming out of that romantic tradition into what we call late romanticism. But don't forget, he was also of his time. There are things that he did, some of his operas, for example, that were very contemporary. Elektra and Salome, Ariadne auf Naxos, that show the influence of the Wagnerian tradition, but were also, of their time. He was not just looking back, he was also looking forward.
What exactly do you call this grouping of songs? Is there a particular name for it?
No, because Strauss didn't actually write these 4 to be a set of 4. Okay. They were essentially 4 individual songs for soprano and large orchestra. Oh. And he was writing them toward the end of his life, the very end of his life, in fact. Mm-hmm. And it was his publisher that decided to sort of put them together as a sort of a set of 4. Mm-hmm. So Strauss didn't sit down one day and say, I think I'm going to write a piece called The 4 Last Songs. He was working on these songs. In fact, there was speculation that he was actually working on a 5th that he never completed or never got round to starting. So they weren't conceived of as a group of 4. Huh. They were 4 discrete songs that have something in common in terms of theme, etc.
So Strauss can't really be to blame for the final result here. I'm interested in how the music, the words of Hermann Hesse, and the other author, whose name I'm not sure how to pronounce, who does the 4th. Okay, Eichendorff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the singing come together. So if Strauss didn't intend for these to be a group of songs, I'm assuming then that the words came later.
Well, he had come across the poem by Eichendorff, who was a German romantic poet. Mm-hmm. He'd come across that poem, and it had struck him. Strauss, I think, was in his 80s when he was writing these poems. So he knows he's toward the end of his life. he comes across his poem by Eichendorff, which is it's the last of the four. Mm-hmm. It's called Im Abendrot, at sunset. Right. And it spoke to him. And then a friend gave him a copy of the complete works of Hermann Hesse. In that collection, he found other poems that had similar themes. And so he started to write, although they're discrete songs, they have a similarity of theme and of tone. And that's what drew him. It was the text there first, and then he sets the text to music.
That's so interesting. I know a lot of writers and filmmakers are inspired by music to write what they write. And so to have it sort of reversed and have a musician inspired by words, that's really interesting. So the song contains 3 stanzas of lyrics. And the first is all about death, and like you said, we're talking about graveyards and crypts. And then the last 2 are about life. They're about the sort of traditional springtime themes. The rest of this, there's not a lot of correlation between the seasons. You begin to very quickly understand that what's being talked about here are not the seasons of the earth so much as they are the seasons of maybe a soul or a life.
Of life, right. Because what is the title of the second of these 4 songs?
September.
September, what would you expect?
You would expect for spring to be followed by summer, and it skips right over summer, and it goes directly into fall, and the entire thing is about death. There are all of these, the garden is grieving, golden drop the leaves slowly, and so summer, the only time you really even see summer in this entire set of songs is when it says that summer smiles faintly and in surprise in the dying dream of the garden. And so
the only time we meet summer is as it's on its way out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And how does that tie in, do you think, with what we heard in the first song, In Spring?
Well, it goes back to the very beginning of the first song of spring.
Right. It's Hesse's text. Mm-hmm. When he introduces summer, it's within the context of its relationship to autumn. In other words, summer is on the way out, it's waning. Mm-hmm. It's that sense of death, or of not so much death, but of transition, as one season transitions into the other. So at the beginning of the first song, Spring, we have the shadowy crypts. We're sort of going from that death to life, and then in September we have the opposite.
Yeah.
It's the dying of the summer and the fading of the garden in September.
The death seems to be getting thicker. There's more death happening, for sure.
So as that death theme becomes more and more entrenched, what do we encounter in the third poem?
The third part, which is called Upon Going to Sleep.
Beim Schlafen gehen.
This one seems to be about death as a release, as a relief. I love what it says at the very beginning. Made tired by the day now, my passionate longing shall welcome the starry night like a tired child.
And there is that sense there of that welcoming, of that, if you like, blessed relief. And as the second stanza goes on, hands, stop all your work, brow, forget all your thinking. All my senses now yearn to sink into slumber. Again, we're going to sleep.
I think it's so interesting how Hesse is able to talk about death, which is this kind of morbid thing, in this really lovely way. There's nothing about this set of songs to me that sounds downtrodden or fearful or any of the things that you associate with morbidity,
Right. And that's what I think is at the core of these 4 songs, is that they are about, quote-unquote, death, if you like, 4 last songs. They're about the last days of a person's life, etc. But it's not a sense of fear at approaching death, but a sort of a welcoming, in a sense, or this is a transition. There is a sort of resignation there. There's nothing we can do about it, and it's a transition from the cares of the world. In this one, going to sleep, now that I am wearied of the day, it's a passing into eternal sleep, which is that eternal rest.
But it's a sort of open acceptance.
Right, exactly.
You know? And it's sort of like, well, this is part of the experience.
Exactly.
You know?
That life, I mean, death is a part of life.
Mm-hmm.
It's all one. We've talked about the text.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the music.
It's all in this sort of major key. It's very epic and expansive, and but it's all about death. It's all about dying.
But at the same time, it's about it's a sort of release.
Yeah.
And so there is that sense of freedom. Talk about your reaction to this recording as Renee Fleming and the Houston Symphony conducted by Christoph Eschenbach. What about that soprano?
Oh my
It's
goodness.
soprano and orchestra.
I thought it was so incredibly beautiful. Her voice is just...
Oh, it's immaculate. Let's pretend that it's not necessarily Renee Fleming, but any soprano. What does Strauss do with essentially two things? There's the vocal line and then there's the orchestral line, if you like.
She, I noticed, is singing for a soprano, singing at a very low octave.
At times she goes very high as well. What I think is so strong here is the fact that the orchestra is not there to accompany the voice. The voice and the orchestra are equal partners.
I hadn't really thought about that.
And there is a part of the beauty of these songs is that interplay between the voice and the orchestra.
Yes, I did notice that. It's almost as if the orchestra is setting the scene. As if, because there are so many allusions made to nature and the seasons, it's almost as if the orchestra is providing that in music, while the soul, or whatever is being personified here, like Renee Fleming is sort of bringing that to life.
Notice also how, in line with what these songs are about, is the lines that the soprano has to sing are incredibly long. They are long and flowing. Mm-hmm. There is that sense of, the arc of the line being the arc of life, as you head toward death or whatever lies beyond death. Mm-hmm. The lines are very, very long. There's nothing staccato, there's nothing short. It's all very languid, which is very much in keeping with the themes of these pieces.
Let's hear a little bit of the fourth part.
Here, this is at sunset, the beginning of the fourth song, and you hear that long line in the orchestra. Mm-hmm. It's not so much that it's slow, long phrases.
There's such a mixture of emotion in the music throughout. You can't ever say that one piece is in a minor key or one is in a major key. It's very complicated, the music, despite the fact that it's slow.
Yes, and it's again there is a tinge of sadness.
Melancholy.
Melancholy is perhaps a better word, yes. But at the same time, it's not doom and gloom.
Right.
It's very lush. Strauss and late Romanticism. It's very lush, the writing for the orchestra. And notice that, I don't know how far into the song, but we still haven't heard the voice. Mm-hmm. So, there is that interplay between the orchestra and the voice. They're both equal parties in this music. And hear her soar. And that soaring, of course, is what the larks are going to be doing a little bit later.
So what's interesting to me, the four songs, or at least the words in the four songs, are sort of a circle. Because it ends with a question, can this perhaps be death? As if you don't know. The person experiencing this isn't sure. And then when you go back to the first piece, in dusky graveyards, I dreamed long of your trees and blue skies, of your scent and your birdsong. This is almost an Eastern view of death, where perhaps this death is not an end, but just another beginning.
Right, it's a transition. But also notice that there isn't an attempt to make a definitive statement. Mm-hmm. Is this death?
Right.
There is that sense of unknowing.
Uh-huh.
And notice that at the beginning, we start with death in the shadowy crypts, mm-hmm. and then we go to life and the spring and the summer.
Which, okay, I take in a couple of ways. Now, this brings me to the fourth piece, at sunset. I think it's so interesting how it ends, because it's kind of a surprise. The whole thing seems to be kind of a review of life. We've done all of this stuff. We're tired, now we're through, it's
notice that they say at the beginning of Imabendrut, at sunset, the last of the four songs, we have gone through sorrow and joy hand in hand. It's like an elderly couple.
Yeah.
They have spent the best part of their lives together, and here they are at the sunset of their lives.
Yeah. He uses the symbol of the larks. Only two larks ascend, night dreaming into the fragrant air. It's
the representation of the two people, of their souls almost leaving their bodies and rising up into the firmament and coming one with the universe. The epicness of the souls returning to the universe, if you like, rejoining the eternal.
Yeah, and the music really informs the story here. Because if Strauss had given the music in this fourth piece a sort of down note, that would have made a very different story.
What's happening here in the music?
There's a sort of slowing down.
Right, and it just continues to get quieter and quieter and slower and slower. And then what does Strauss put in there? Right at the very end, what do we hear in the piccolos?
Oh, wow.
There's your two larks.
I feel like we should just stop right there. That's amazing.
Well, and that's where it does stop. But notice that it just fades, right? But there is a sense that those two birds, that the birds live on. Their song is still strong, even though the music is fading away. Again, it's that symbol of the continuation of the soul, if you like. That transition from life to whatever is after life, whatever is beyond life.
St.John, this has been absolutely fascinating. And this piece, thank you so much for introducing me to it. I will definitely go back to this and listen to it again. I haven't thought that necessarily about everything that I've learned so far, but this is it's really lovely.
It really is, and it's achingly beautiful.
That's a good way to describe it, you guys. Achingly beautiful. What we've basically learned today is that Strauss and Hermann Hesse were the Smiths of the early 1900s. Or maybe the Smiths were listening to the last four songs when they wrote Asleep. Whatever the case, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Classical Classroom. We'll catch you next time.
Sing me to sleep, sing me to sleep. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. Sing me to sleep, sing me to sleep. And then leave me alone. Don't try to wake me in the morning, 'cause I will be gone. Don't feel bad for me, I